So what the heck is this Gauss' law stuff? So this is a presentation for basically introductory physics students. Let me go ahead and say that when I teach algebra-based physics, I don't do Gauss' law. I think it's too complicated for that. But if you're in a calculus-based course or something else, or maybe it's an algebra-based course, I don't know, and you need to figure out what it is, I'm gonna explain it to you the best as I can. The best I can. Okay, let's get started. Flux. You might be too young for this, but it's good for me. This is a flux capacitor, and it's what makes time travel possible. That's a joke. It's from the show Back to the Future, the movie Back to the Future. But, you know, in the past, whenever I talk about flux, someone would always say, just like a flux capacitor, and I don't know, because I don't know what it is. So, but just wanted to include that in there. But let's talk about rain flux. Because we want to get into this idea of the electric flux, and it's, you know, we can't really see the electric field, so it's useful to visualize something else. And I like to talk about rain flux. So here is, let's say I'm going to actually grab a prop over here. Maybe you can see in my little window. Suppose I want to determine how much rain hits this piece of paper. Well, there are several factors that depend on the amount of rain hitting this paper. First is how fast is it raining? And in this case, I call that F rain. I'm not sure why I called it F, that's a force, but it's like the rate that the rain's coming down. The next thing that can change how much rain hits this is the angle between the rain, which I'm assuming is coming straight down, and this. Now, normally when we have an area like this, we're going to represent the area direction as a vector perpendicular to that surface. So that would be my area vector, and then the rain would be coming straight down. So if those two are in the same direction or completely opposite directions, so theta is 0, then the flux would be the greatest. As I increase it like this, the flux is going to decrease to 0. So less rain hits it this way than hits it that way. And finally, I can increase the rain flux by increasing the area. If I make this twice as big, it's going to have twice as much rain flux. So it depends on how fast it's raining, the angle between the surface area and the rain, and the size of the area. That's rain flux, and that's how much rain hits it. Now imagine we want to do the exact same thing with electric flux. So we can define electric flux as the electric field dot the vector for the area of some surface and a unit vector normal to that. We call that n hat. Now, if you remember the rules for dot product, we can write that scalar value as the magnitude electric field, the magnitude of the area, and the cosine of the angle between them. And that's all good and dandy, unless the electric field's not constant, or maybe the area is not constant. I could have a curved shape like this, and then make it more complicated. In that case, I'd have to do a surface area integral of the electric field over this whole thing. Okay, now, don't worry. If you've not done a surface area integral, we're not going to do we're never going to use Gauss' law for something that's complicated, except for the case I show you. Then we also have this idea of breaking this into a whole bunch of little tiny surface area elements, and I can find the flux through each piece, and I'll write that as d phi. Oh, phi, we use capital Phi for the flux. Sometimes you'll see phi sub E for electric flux, and phi sub B is magnetic flux, but here I'm just going to call it phi. Okay, let's look at an example. Let's calculate the flux. Here is the flux due to a single point charge through this area. And I did this in VPython. And what you can see is this area, I broke this area into a bunch of smaller squares. And I did that because each square has a different direction and magnitude electric field, since it's the electric field due to a point charge. And so you can see on the other side of that surface area, the arrows represent electric field at that point. I'm assuming the electric field's constant over those tiny little squares. It's not, but I'm assuming that. As I get smaller and smaller squares, it'd be a better and better approximation. But here you can see I could calculate the flux, and I get some value of 19.91 voltmeters. It doesn't really matter what that value is, but I do indeed get a flux. That's important. Now, in this case, I'm assuming n hat is pointing to your left. Well, that's backwards. So that the electric field and the flux are in the same direction, so it'd be a positive flux. The electric field and the area are in the same direction, the area vector. Okay, now what if I add in a second surface area here? Here I have two surfaces right next to each other. And so that first one is the red surface, and I actually moved the charge a little bit, so the flux on that's a little bit different. And then I have another surface right next to it. That second surface is blue. I'm going to say the normal vector for that is in the opposite direction. It's pointing away from the red. So I have two surface areas. They have unit vectors pointing away from each other. So that means that the blue surface is actually going to have a negative flux. I didn't draw the electric field on that surface, but there is an electric field there. It's pointing away from the charge, but the unit vector is pointing towards the charge, so it'd have a negative flux. And then that red surface is a positive flux again. If I take those two fluxes, I get the flux through the red surface is 12.439. The blue surface is negative 15.2. And so the total flux through those two surfaces is not zero. Okay. And you would think as I get those two surfaces closer and closer together, they'd have to be zero, because one's going to have a positive, one's going to have a negative, the same value. But that blue surface is a little bit closer to the charge, so it's going to have a little bit stronger electric field. Now I can actually fix this problem. I can fix this so that I get a zero total flux by adding in the boundaries in between those two surfaces. So now what I've done is I've made a closed surface. It's two parallel plates, and then I have connecting boxes around the middle. And you'll notice in this case, again, I moved the charge just to make the animation better. I have the far side has the closest side has a negative flux. All the other sides have positive flux. And actually, no, it's different. And if I add up all those fluxes, I get something very close to zero. It's not zero, but it's very close. It's not zero because I've made this approximation about the size of the squares. And so, again, we're just calculating flux. That's all I've done. And in this case, I have a completely closed surface, and I get approximately a zero flux. And that's kind of important. Now, what if I move the charge? It doesn't have to be right there. Here's the charge up in the corner of the box. And you can see that part of it has blue squares because those are negative fluxes, and part are positive because those are positive fluxes. I didn't show the total flux, but the total flux is still close to zero. Here is another case where the total flux is not zero. In this case, the charge is actually inside the box. So every square is red. Some are more red than others. If it has a greater flux, that charge is actually in the upper right-hand corner. And so the lower left-hand side, the electric flux is very, very small, and so it's a darker square, but it still has a total flux, a total positive flux. And that number is important, 115.754. Okay, let's do a little calculation. So if I have this constant when you look at electric fields, it's 1 over 4 pi epsilon naught. We define that to be 9 times 10 to the 9th Newton meter squared per Coulomb squared. I can take this and solve for epsilon naught. That's pretty easy. I get 8.854 times 10 to the negative 12th. No big deal there. What if I take that number and I multiply it by my flux? In this case, if I take that number and I multiply it by the flux that I just got, I get epsilon naught times the flux is about 1 times 10 to the negative 9th. And guess what? That unit has units of coulombs, and that is around 1 times 10 to the negative 9th. The charge inside the box was a 1 nanocoulomb, 1 times 10 to the negative 9th coulombs. So if I take the flux through the box and multiply it by epsilon naught, I get the charge inside that box. And this is Gauss's law. Okay, Gauss's law says that if you take some closed surface and you find the flux around the whole thing. In this case, I did it numerically just to show you that it doesn't have to be something special. I'll show you a case that's easier in just a second. And I find that flux, that's what that left-hand side of that equation is. It's going to be equal to the total charge inside the box divided by epsilon naught. If there's no charge inside the box, if I put the charge outside the box, I get a flux of 0. If I put the charge inside the box, I get a flux that depends on the charge inside the box. Okay, what if I put 2 charges inside the box? Here's what that looks like. Here's a box, a bigger box. And I actually have a dipole inside of there. And you can see that part of the box, and it's not even centered in the middle. Part of the box has negative flux. Part of the box has positive flux. The total flux for this box is very close to 0 because there's net charge of 0 in the box. Okay, what about another case? Here is something that you'll see a lot in the introductory courses. This is the electric field due to a point charge. Can we use Gauss's law to find an expression for this, which seems kind of silly, and in some ways it is, but I'll explain. If I have a point charge, the electric field points away from it in all directions, spherically symmetrical. So I can choose an appropriate closed surface over which the flux is easy to calculate. And in this case, that would be a sphere. If I take a sphere centered on that point charge, then I have something magical. Because at every instance on that sphere, the unit vector for the area is pointing directly away from the center, and so is the electric field. They're in the same direction. Also, if I assume spherically symmetric electric fields, then the magnitude electric field everywhere on the surface is the same. So that makes my surface integral trivial. So let's do it. So here is, on the left-hand side, I have the definition of flux E dot n hat dA, but E is constant on that surface and is in the same direction as n hat. So if I take E dot n hat, I get E. And then n hat's just 1, and that's a dA. So I have E times dA. So now I no longer have a vector equation. And on top of that, I can factor out the E, right, because it doesn't change, and I get the closed surface integral of an area of a sphere, which I know. So the area of a sphere is 4 pi r squared, so that whole integral becomes 4 pi r squared, the area, times electric field, which I don't know. And I set that equal to the total charge inside, Q, divided by epsilon naught. Now I can solve that for E, and I get 1 over 4 pi epsilon naught, Q over r squared, and that's the electric field due to point charge, which we already knew. Now, I'd like to point out that this is the way we normally see the electric field due to a point charge as a vector equation. And there is something very important going on here, because you can't get the electric field due to a point charge with Gauss' law without some assumptions. We had to assume the direction of electric field and assume the symmetry. Right? So you had to make some assumptions about what that electric field looked like before you could actually use Gauss' law to find it. So in that case, it's not always useful. There are some cases that it's super useful. Okay, but we still have to make those assumptions. And in the end, we don't get a vector expression for the electric field because we already assumed something about the electric field. Okay. Now I have to show you a physics joke. So this is something that you'll see on a lot of t-shirts. I've recopied it in my own manner. It shows this picture that's very similar to this, and it says 0 flux given. And I think it's kind of funny. Okay, but it also is kind of not funny because I don't get it. I get the box, right? They say that there's an electric field coming into the box on the left, leaving on the right. If you calculate the flux through the whole box, you'd get 0. So 0 flux. Got it. Okay. They also include this equation, phi equals the double integral s q dot dA equals 0. Okay, so are they saying Q is E? That's when I'm just not really following there. I don't get that equation. It looks cool, and maybe if you don't really care, it's fine. And maybe there's some other units where this works. I don't know why, but it bothers me. So I actually made up my own version of a Flux T-shirt for fun. And so here's my t-shirt. I didn't give it the caption yet, so I'll give you a second to think about this. I did have the correct equation for flux, E dot n hat dA, as vectors. I think that's really important. Oh, and that circle on the integral, if you haven't seen that, that means a closed surface integral. We know it's a surface integral because of dA. Okay, so this is a picture of U, and inside there's a charge, and that shows the electric field around U. So this says flux U. It's kind of childish, but, you know, I don't know, maybe it's better than the 0 flux given. Okay, let's look back at this. Here is the electric field due to the flux for an electric dipole, and it's important to show that this is a 0 flux. Okay. Now, if I just displayed the electric field due to a dipole, I get this pattern of field in space, right? We have seen these electric field lines due to a dipole, and that's important because a dipole has a 0 net charge. And it has 0 flux if you put a dipole in a box. That's important. Now, what if I switch over to a magnet? A magnet, this is an actual magnet with iron filings. It's not the magnetic field, but it shows you the pattern of field of space around a magnet, a bar magnet. And it turns out that pattern of field of space looks mathematically the same as the electric field due to a dipole. So this is actually, we would have a magnetic dipole moment for this bar magnet. And we can calculate the field of space around it, and that's all cool. We could replace that with electric current and calculate the magnetic dipole moment for an electric loop of current. Now, here's the important thing. Since the flux for the electric dipole is 0, then we replace that with a magnetic field, B, then we only have magnetic fields due to dipoles. We don't have individual single magnetic charges. We can never have a single magnetic charge inside of that box. So we're always going to have the magnetic flux through some closed surface is equal to 0. This is called Gauss's law for magnetism. It might not seem like a big deal, but it kind of is. And it assumes that there are no such thing as magnetic monopoles. Maybe there are. I don't know. We've never found them. Okay, if we did find them, then this equation wouldn't be true. So that's Gauss's law for electric field, Gauss's law for magnetic field. And I hope you find that useful, and I'll talk to you later.